Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines remain unchanged. So exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, deadline December 7th, 11th to 9 p.m. So not this Friday, but the next Friday. Again, everything's available ahead of time, so you can completify it as long as you do before the deadline.
If for the quizzes, is it the best 10 or the best 15 quizzes?
Best 10.
Okay.
Yeah, so your overall grade is calculated by pulling the best 4 exams out of 5, best 10 quizzes out of a whole bunch, and of course the paper grade. Now to see if you need exam 5, the final, what you can do is go on Blackboard. There's an Excel spreadsheet, if you have Excel, and Google Sheets if you don't and have like a Chromebook or something, and you can put in your paper grade, your best 3 exam grades, hypothetical 100% for the final, and your quiz grade, and compare that to your overall grade on Blackboard. And if the grade with the hypothetical 100 of the final is a letter grade or better than your real overall grade, then taking the final could change your grade. And of course you can, it's a spreadsheet, so you can put in all kinds of different scenarios, like what if I got a 70 or 100 or whatever, and you can see every possible combination. If you haven't completed all 4 exams, you can also put in hypotheticals about what you can get on like exam 3 and 4 and 5 to get a particular grade, and so you can use it to do any grade calculation. And so once you've done exams 1 through 4 and all the quizzes you wish to do in the paper, then you can see if you would need exam 5. And if it doesn't do anything, then it doesn't do anything. So if you have, say, an 83.4 without the final, and taking the final would get you an 87.2, well, those are both Bs. So it would improve your numerical grade, but not your letter grade. And so that's how to check. And again, your overall grade, it's in real time. Blackboard is pulling your best 10 quizzes and your best 4 exams in the paper. And if you've only, say, done 2 tests this time, your overall grade will look bad, because it'll be pulling 2 actual grades and pulling into zeros. And I've gotten some panicked emails from people saying, my God, I'm failing the class. And I reply back, well, no, because you haven't done exam 3, 4, or 5, and so not technically failing, but no, in a way. For the paper, if anybody hasn't done the paper yet, there's still the desperation deadline, December 8th, that end of day. Okay, before pressing on to our new stuff.
Okay, so for the paper deadline, is the maximum you can get 50% off, or is that a right-away given, like you just automatically get 50%?
Max is 50%.
So you can get anything lower than that?
Oh, you could get lower, but it's a half credit. But it's worth doing because it's better than a 0.
Okay. And I have another question about the STAR survey. How does that actually, can you clarify how it actually helps survey?
Oh.
Because I know you still have to do your quizzes.
Oh, well, the way that works is if you go and do the STAR survey, it's an anonymous survey, so I don't know who's doing it in particular, but there's a checkbox to check which class or classes you're in, if you're in multiple classes. And then what I do is I look at what the percentage of the participation was, add 10 percentage points to that, and that becomes the STAR's quiz grade. So effectively, if enough people do it, it becomes a free 100% quiz. Now, if your quiz grade is already 100%, then it can't help you. But if it's less than 100%, then it would help you.
And for the syllabus quiz that we did in the beginning of the year, does that also kind of help with our quiz grade, or is just all quizzes that were within the section?
It counts, it's part of the whole pool of quizzes. So if it's one of your best 10, then it counts.
Okay.
If it's not, then it gets dropped.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, so last time looking at our good dead friend John Stuart Mill talking about utilitarianism, which is one of the big dogs of ethics. The idea basically being that when you're deciding what should I do, for example, you can apply it to like individual decisions, like Giving Tuesday was yesterday, and you're trying to figure out, like, should I give the money to some charity, or should I spend it on, say, a burrito? And what you do, according to Mill, is you would weigh, the pluses and minuses. how much happiness would be generated, and how much unhappiness. You can also, of course, apply at large scale. It generally works better at large scale. So, for example, one of the things that is happening is we're depleting our supply of metals. And we use metals for all kinds of stuff, obviously like metal things, but also obviously in our technology. And so they're trying to mine the seafloor. Basically, crudely put, it's like a big vacuum cleaner that just sucks up the seafloor and scoops out these nodules of metal. And it kind of sucks for the critters that get caught up in its siphon. Life is cruel but fair, but mostly cruel. Actually, mostly unfair. And so if we're deciding, like, is this morally okay to do, we would weigh the pluses and minuses. What are the benefits, what are the harms? Now for Mill, he has a very broad scope. As we saw, the utilitarianist answer the question, what's a value, positive or negative? Mill says happiness is positive, unhappiness negative, and they have to decide who counts. So when you're doing your spreadsheet of morality, whose happiness and unhappiness gets in there. So, for example, if someone just is an ethical egoist and they just care about themselves, they would just put in their own happiness. So if you're an ethical egoist, you probably buy the burrito for yourself. Unless you believe that by giving to happiness, giving to the charity and then posting about it on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter would get you more happiness as people praise one for their goodness. But if you're like Mill and you think everybody counts, then you'd be in quite a conundrum because you have to figure out, okay, I'd be like pretty happy with that burrito, but what effect would me giving to this charity have on everybody, including myself? And so you have to try to figure out the effect on everyone. Then we turn to Mill's proof, and he claims that his proof by analogy succeeds. Or so he claims. Now, one objection he considers is this. His theory says the only good is happiness, specifically pleasure, the only evil, pain. And obviously people seem to want things other than happiness, like burritos, for example. And so the objection is that his theory is got it wrong because he says the only thing of worth is happiness, the only thing of negative value is unhappiness. And the objection is, but wait, John Stuart Mill, people want other things. They find other things desirable. So what he has to do is show that only happiness is good, it's the only good, and unhappiness is the only bad. Now he considers, first, virtue, because he notes that people will often say people want virtue, and they value that, so that seems different from happiness, so how does he respond? And then he also considers money, power, and fame, and those are all things that people also want, a list of things people want. Now, beginning with virtue, he uses the same reply to all three, so I'll smush them all together. It goes like this. His first reply is, people often want those things, virtue, money, power, or fame, because it makes them happy. And so someone is, virtuous because they feel happy. Or they get the money because getting the money makes them feel happy. Or having the power and fame. But as Mill points out, there seem to be some people who they want virtue for its own sake. Or they want money, just piling up the money. Or the power and the fame. So how does he handle those people? Well, he does it this way, and I'll use a bad analogy. If you go to a store like Walmart, you can buy a cake, but can you buy the element cake? Is there such a thing on the periodic table of elements? Is there like cake? No, because cake's made up of other stuff. It's got a variety of ingredients. So there is cake, but there's no such thing as like cake. It's not like, CK or whatever the hell. That's probably already something dangerous and terrible. So you can get elemental cake, and there are different types of cake. There's like, red velvet cake, German chocolate cake, etc. All these different cakes. And they're made of different ingredients. And you can have vegan cake, and I guess you can have bacon cake, because anything can go into a cake. So Mill says, using the analogy to defend Mill, he says that happiness is not like a simple thing. You couldn't go to like Walmart and say, give me a bucket of happiness. What your happiness consists of is a bunch of complex things that all kind of blend together, like, you know, eggs and flour and sugar and milk and stuff and form cake, frosting of course, because without frosting, cake is not cake. It's impossible. It's just bread, you know, cake without frosting is bread. That's just physics. So his reply is that for some people, virtue is part of their happiness, or money, or power, or fame, part of that keiko happiness. And so his reply is, to get around this is, when people say, yeah, but don't people love virtue, don't people love money, don't people love power and fame? And his two replies are, first, yeah, they love that stuff because it makes them happy. Or, they love that stuff because it's part of their happiness. Like virtue is the egg in their happy cake, or money is the frosting on their happy cake. And so he concludes that he has proven that his theory is correct, that what matters is everybody's happiness and everybody's unhappiness, and he thinks he's proven this. And it's only happiness that is good, and only unhappiness that is bad. And then he died. So done. Now, utilitarianism, as we saw, is very appealing. And in general, if you ever have to do like some ethical reasoning, it's a really useful system to do. In fact, when I have to crank out like writings on ethics, I always bring utilitarianism because it's super simple. So all you do is just lay out the pluses and minuses, say, you know, make reference to John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism, and then draw your conclusion. More pluses and minuses, good. More minuses than plus, bad. And you can apply it to anything. Everything from burrito over charity to mining the ocean, to environmental regulations, to voting rights, and it works on anything. Now, since it's so super useful, why isn't it just the only morality, where I would just say, hey, here's how you solve all your moral problems. You just break this out, and you're done. You're, you know, good and evil settled. Well, the reasons are, of course, is it's got a lot of problems. Now, some problems are internal problems, and some external. And the difference is this. An internal problem for a theory is not aimed at attacking or destroying the theory. It's something that has to be fixed in the theory, and it does work from kind of the assumption the theory is good, it just needs some stuff fixed. Whereas external problems are basically attacks from non-utilitarians saying the theory is terrible. So it's kind of the difference between, you know, people saying, how could he make this better? And we have these concerns, to external attacks saying, how do we get rid of this, or why is this terrible? Now, one of the problems that utilitarians have to face is formulating how, crudely put, how the goodies are divided up. Because utilitarians say, you gotta maximize happiness for those who count. Now, this is the same problem that you run into when you've got like a group of people and a pizza. Or you have a country and you have, you know, money and wealth. The question is, everyone agrees, you know, more pizza is better, more wealth is better, but the question is, what is the best distribution? So utilitarians have to address that distribution problem. So like if you had a group of people and you get a pizza, the problem is, you know, how do you divide that up? What's the fair division? And same with like the economy. If you're trying to maximize wealth, there's all kinds of ways to do it. So using that as like an analogy or metaphor, you could have a few people with just billions of dollars and then have most other people with almost nothing. A billionaires control 50% of the wealth of the planet, and the remaining people, you know, we don't got that. And that would be one distribution. Now you could also have one that is, instead of having, you know, a few people controlling almost everything, you could have it perfectly evenly divided. You know, everyone, you take the sum total of all the loot divided by, you know, X billion people, and we all get the same, like with a pizza. We each get our own, you know, if there's 10 people, you cut the pizza into 10 slices, everyone gets a slice. Now, of course, there's all kinds of other divisions. You could have one where instead of 8 billionaires, you've got, 200 billionaires, or you've got thousands of millionaires, or any possible combination. Now, for the utilitarian, the same problem arises with, happiness. So if you're going to divvy up the happiness, do you focus on making, say, a few people super happy? Or do you focus on making everybody kind of happy? And that's, a similar sort of problem. Again, this is not an attack on utilitarianism. You wouldn't say, aha, you gotta formulate it, so the theory is terrible. This is one they have to work out. If you're a utilitarian, you have to decide, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to have a few things that are super happy, or happiness divided more equally? And again, a perfect metaphor of this is money and pizza. If you're trying to maximize, pizza happiness, do you give one person a whole pizza, or do you slice it up and and everyone gets their little slice? Same with money and happiness. Second concern is the problem of consequences. Now, one of the good things, and I guess bad things about life, is life keeps on going. There's always something, some next result. And here's the problem. If you're trying to decide what to do, and you're considering the consequences, you also have to consider the consequences of those consequences. And so the practical problem is, how far out do you have to predict or calculate to say something is good or bad? For example, back in World War II, American medics helped an American ally who was, dying and saved his life. Good? No. This person's name was Ho Chi Minh, who later, of course, the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam was named after him, which, of course, was involved in the Vietnam War. And was the Vietnam War good? Not so great. But now Vietnam, since they're scared of China, they're like our friends now. And so I guess, good? But maybe we'll get into war with China, we'll all die in nuclear fire, so bad. And maybe whatever replaces us will be super awesome and super cool. Good? Yes, you enter the problem of trying to predict, is my action good or bad? Now you can, of course, use kind of silly examples to make the point pretty clearly. For example, suppose you're walking home from school and you see an apartment building's on fire and someone's on the top floor and they yell, "Catch my baby." They throw a baby down to you and you look up. Now, if you catch the baby and the baby grows up to be the next Hitler, that was bad. So you should let the baby fall. But if you don't catch the baby and the baby was going to grow up to be the next, Martin Luther King Jr., then that would be terrible. But suppose you catch the baby grows out to be the next Hitler, after they take over the world and they're murdering everybody, they send you a nice note saying, "Thank you for allowing me to murder everybody." But suppose, after that, their great-great-granddaughter ushers in an age of enlightenment that lasts 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. So, good. But suppose her great-great-great, grandson, just says, "I'm going to outdo my uncle, super evil Hitler, and just destroys everything." But then their great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, you could go on forever. So it seemed like you never know, what do you do? Because anything you do could be terrible or good. Now to fix this, utilitarians came up with a couple fixes. One is, this is from Mill and others, is you go with what are called the reasonably foreseeable consequences, given our limited abilities. Namely that typically, if a baby is being dropped out of a burning building, is the baby going to be Hitler? Probably not. Probably not going to be next Einstein or Dr. King. It's probably just going to be a normal person. Statistically speaking, going to be normal. So you should probably catch them. I mean, true, you might really have screwed things up. Or you might have done something really great, but statistically speaking, probably best to catch them because it's probably going to be okay. Because those scenarios are super weird. And so, in terms of those moral calculations, you go with what you already know. Catching babies is generally good. Letting them fall, generally bad. Now, they're also, for the utilitarians, because they believe in objective morality, if there would ultimately be like a score. So, you know, the goodness or badness of your action ultimately wouldn't be known, I guess, until the score is finally tallied. And if the universe goes on forever, I guess it would never truly be good, or in a way truly good or bad, because the consequences, you know, like a butterfly effect, could just keep on going forever, creating good and creating bad to infinity. And I guess only God would keep score of that. So that becomes kind of weird. Now there's also the matter of intended consequences. So there are cases where we like intend to do something good, but because of factors beyond our control, something bad happens. For example, some years ago, there was a scary case where people were getting a spinal infection, meningitis, from getting medicine, and because in the production plant, the medicine was contaminated. Now the doctor's doing it, you know, they are way responsible because they're like, here, this will make you better, and people getting sick and dying. But we wouldn't hold the doctors accountable because the medicine, you couldn't tell. You couldn't look at it and say, you know, if it was full of like mold, and they were like, yeah, you know, then that would be one thing. But it looked perfectly fine. Like the people who, you know, people at a restaurant, you know, when they have the lettuce shipped in from someplace, and it's got, you know, Escherichia coli all over it, and they put together your salad, they don't mean to hurt you. So you could say that, given what they know, that the salad's not supposed to have bacteria all over it, it's bad that it happened, but they're not morally accountable. So utilitarians, they think they can solve those problems. Now, there are also, of course, problems designed to try to destroy utilitarianism, to say you shouldn't accept this theory because it's got these problems. And now, someone who's utilitarian can bring these problems up too, because they can, you know, be aware of them and say, look, we got to fix this problem. Now, one of them is just like kind of silly, and one is also kind of silly, but these are pretty standard. Now, probably the most devastating criticism, well, the two most devastating are the first two. First one is this. Utilitarianism says, whenever you're going to do something, we can take the example of, suppose you go to a place and you're going to order a burrito, and suppose it's a good burrito, so it's like $10 burrito with guacamole. And you, of course, could also take that money, and suppose something like outside, you see someone out there asking for money because they're hungry. So you could buy yourself a burrito, those are your last 10, or you get them a burrito. So the question would be, which would create more happiness? Now, suppose I'd already eaten pretty well today. I'm just going like, I think I'll just stuff another burrito into my overstuffed stomach because, you know, I like burritos. And I look at the other person, they're all super thin and shaking because they haven't eaten for quite some time. Well, I should give them the 10 because they'll be happier. And that seems fine. But then, of course, anything I do, I could probably make someone else happier by giving them, like, whatever money I spend on myself, I could spend on them. Whatever time I'm spending doing anything, I could probably always be doing something better to help people. Which means if I was consistent about that, every action I took, I would say, well, do I buy my family a Christmas present, my sister a Christmas present? Well, that would make her happy, but then I could take the same money and give it to people who are starving. And they'd probably be a lot happier because now they have food. And similarly, I could take some time to, you know, watch something on Netflix or read, or I could take that time going out and build houses for Habitat for Humanity. And everything I do, I could always be doing something better. Now, every action I take would seem to be the right thing to do. But what if you gave away, like, all your money, and you spent all your time just doing stuff for other people?
You really won't get happy.
Yeah, you'd be poor, starving, and exhausted, and it would be terrible for you. In a way, it'd be terrible for everybody, because everybody would just be exhausting themselves trying to help everybody. It'd be like, to use kind of analogy, it'd be like standing in front of a door and everyone saying, no, you first, and everyone just dies because they never get their burrito, starvation. So that's a bit of a problem, because utilitarianism would seem to require you to basically destroy yourself for goodness, which would be clearly bad. Now, the fix for this, and I brought it up at the start, is act versus rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism, you assess every action in isolation. Would me giving that person $10 create more happiness than me buying a burrito? Yes, so do it. Would me giving the money I spent on my sister's present for food for homeless people make them happier than her? Yes, do that. Would going out and working, for Habitat for Humanity instead of doing something I enjoy on the weekend, would that be create more happiness? Yes. But then eventually, I just kill myself because I'd just be exhausted and starving. So the way they fix it is this. They make it a matter of the rule. So what you do is you'd say, well, if this was a rule that people sacrificed all of their happiness for everybody else, then they would be super miserable. So that would be not good, so we don't have to do that. We should still do, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, but we go by the general, rule as opposed to assessing each action. And rule utilitarians think they solve the problem. Then critics come and say, well, you can't do this because then if you go back to the actions, every single action is still the right thing to do, which still ends up killing you. So terrible. And they say, no, the rule prevents that. The critics say, no, it doesn't. And then they go and get some burritos because they get tired of arguing. Now, second killer problem is the right of numerical minorities. Because utilitarianism, again, works on creating more happiness than unhappiness. So if you're doing a calculation, then if you create more happiness than unhappiness by, say, doing awful stuff to a numerical minority, but it makes the numerical minority, like, really happy, then it would be justified. On the grounds that, well, because you'd look at it and say, well, these people are super unhappy, these people are happy, or even if it was close, just like, oh, well, they're a little happier, so then you'd say, well, that's the right thing to do. Now, as you might imagine, science fiction abounds with examples of this, kind of extreme, parables to illustrate it. One of the best is by an author, Ursula K. Le Guin. She died recently, which is sad. Really good writer. Well, was. She's dead now. And she wrote the Wizard of Earthsea trilogy, Left Hand of Darkness, and other good books. And one of her classic short stories was Those Who Walk Away from Omelets. And she asked us to imagine, and again, it's like fantasy sci-fi, so it's make-believe. She asked us to imagine a sort of a wonderful city or nation called Omelets. Everyone there is healthy and happy. Everything is as good as things could possibly be. Now, of course, as always is the case, there is a terrible secret. But not really a secret, because everybody knows about it. And since it's a sci-fi fantasy story, we know that this is the reality, even though, of course, it's not possible. And the secret to the success and happiness of Omelets is this. In a dungeon, the deepest and dankest dungeon, there is a child who is locked up. And no one must ever show the child a kind word or any kindness. They can only bring them food and keep them alive. And there must always be someone in that dungeon. Now, the kind of twist on it is that everyone knows about it. It's not like a secret that no one is aware of. Whenever somebody comes of age, they're shown the full price that is paid. So everyone in the city knows exactly what the cost of all their happiness and health and well-being is. And so the trade-off is you have one single person who suffers their entire life. But everyone else, thousands, or if you want millions of people, live in health, happiness, peace, and harmony. And the reason why it's called Those Who Walk Away from Omelets is because some people, they realize what's happening and they leave the city. No one ever rescues the child, but they just leave the city. And so it raises the question, or at least philosophers put it this way, is that worth the price? Now, if you're a utilitarian, the answer is, yeah. You have one person suffers, and you have thousands or millions who are healthy, happy, peaceful. Now, of course, the people who make the objection, they want people to feel, because if it was like if this was a movie or TV show, the way it would play out, of course, is some hero would find out the person's in the basement, and they would go and do what? Yeah, they'd rescue them, and then it'd be a big happy ending. But of course, the way it's set up, as soon as they free that kid, almost falls into ruin. You know, everyone gets diseased and everything collapses. And so it is, presents that moral conundrum. If you could benefit the many at the expense of the few, is it morally right? Now, this is kind of a battle of intuitions. Would we be willing to do terrible things to a few to benefit the many? And again, sometimes it's sci-fi cases, sometimes it can be reality, where you have to, like, for example, all our cheap technology or cheap clothing, all the stuff we have, we enjoy our lifestyle, it comes at the expense of other people in our own country and other countries working really bad conditions and bad wages. That's why our iPads and Amazon Kindles and stuff are so cheap. Somebody's getting paid terrible money, working in terrible conditions, so we can have that stuff. And so essentially we're the people along this living off all the other people who are suffering. But in a way, we're also the kid in the basement, because people live off our suffering too, so it's all terrible. Yeah, so there is that problem. Another example, imagine that you're a sheriff in a small town that's been plagued by a series of mysterious deaths. So basically, any Stephen King novel, or Stranger Things. And there's someone that the townspeople are convinced is the guilty person. And you go, get some evidence, you arrest him, lock him up. But then you find out, beyond all doubt, that person's not guilty. But the townsfolk are enraged, and they demand, the crimes are so terrible, they demand blood, and they come to grab that person. And you know these townsfolk, and you know that they're so angry that there's basically two options. One is you turn over the innocent person to the mob and let them kill him, or you fight it out with the townsfolk, in which you die, your deputies die, the person dies, and a lot of townsfolk die. So what do you do? Well, the utilitarian would say what? You hand them over, because it's better that because they're going to die anyways. It's better that they die than the next day you can give them a lecture on how terrible they were when the murders continue. But intuitively, there seems something wrong with doing that. Now, critics of utilitarianism say, yeah, utilitarianism says that's the right thing to do, but we believe that that's wrong. Now, one way rule utilitarians try to get around it is this. In that individual case, of course, you would save more people by turning the person over. But what if that became like a standard rule? Whenever an angry mob shows up, you just turn people over to them. What would happen to justice? Yeah, because every time people were angry with something, they just show up, give us the person, and they just hand them over. So I guess it'd speed up the criminal justice process. On that side, it'd be terrible, because eventually people would just be mob ruling all over the place. So you could say in that case, with a person, if you're a rule utilitarian, you'd say that you should just shoot it out with the townsfolk and die for the greater good. But that seems problematic too. Yeah, so bit of a problem. Now again, with these criticisms, utilitarians think they can handle them. Critics think they can't. Now a third problem, which is also pretty serious, is that for the utilitarian, all that matters is happiness and unhappiness. So nothing else is forbidden. If people enjoyed really terrible things and created more happiness and unhappiness, that would be okay. So for the utilitarian, nothing, think of the most horrible things, genocide, murder, etc. None of those are inherently bad. So, you could take kind of like a historical case, also, sci-fi kind of does it. The Romans used to have those arenas where people would fight for real, gladiatorial combat. And we kind of have that now, except people just get concussions and stuff. But imagine, the NFL is like, we're not making enough money, we need something exciting. They start arming the players with swords and spears and stuff. And suppose people really like it. Well, in that case, we'd have to say, well, you know, if Saturday, you know, what is it, Monday Night Murder Bowl, is, people are pretty stoked about it, then it would be okay. And of course, there are, you know, sci-fi shows about this. Movies like Running Man, Stephen King's, who wrote that, and they made it into a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Totally worth watching, because, you know, Arnold. And the basic idea is a game show where they take convicted criminals and they get a chance to go free by competing against these, you know, gladiator, you know, really, it's kind of like wrestling taken to an extreme. And then so people love it. So great, you know, great entertainment. And intuitively we might say, well, if people really, really like horrible things, that's horrible. Now the utilitarian has a couple of replies. One is, people really can't be that horrible, which they clearly haven't met people. And the second reply is, well, yeah, okay, if, you know, people super like, you know, gladiatorial, you know, murder bull Monday, if people super like it, it's fine. Which, you know, critics say, not fine. Now the last two are much more abstract. And they don't have really much bite. One philosopher criticizing utilitarianism said this: suppose that lying or telling the truth had exactly the same consequences. Then it wouldn't matter what you do. But intuitively we think lying is worse than telling the truth. So you know, that's sort of a problem for utilitarianism. And again, it's kind of abstract. It doesn't have the same bite as like murderable. But yeah, you know, it does seem a bit of a problem. Now, a reply utilitarians can give is this: well, if there is no real difference in the consequences, then it really doesn't matter. Because, you know, we may prefer truth to lies, but then if we sort of look at why we prefer that, well, lies are hurtful, truth is good. But if they have exactly the same results, you might say, why does it matter? Last one was done by, I believe, Bernard Williams. And I always bring this up because every couple of years someone emails me this example and says, you should really use this. And I always politely say, thank you. I've never heard of this example before. But here's the example. In the original example, what you have is, you know, imagine that you're going on vacation in Central America or South America, back when you used to supply countries down there with weapons, I guess today. And you get lost in the jungle, you're like looking at big spiders, and big spiders are looking at you, deciding how it's going to go down. And then you stagger out into a clearing, you're like, oh, thank God I'm in a clearing. Finally got away from those darn spiders. And you see, you're in a village, and you see you know, military trucks and vehicles parked, and you look over and you see the villagers have all been lined up, and they have machine guns set in front of them. You're like, oh crap, maybe the spiders will be better. And one of the person in charge, the captain, sees you and recognizes, you know, looks at you and says, hey, you know, I went to school in the United States, you know, was buying American guns, you know, so how about this? In honor of you being here, you kill one of these villagers and we'll call it a day. But if you don't, I'll be really sad and I'll just have to machine gun all the villagers because that's all that makes me happy. So what do? Do you shoot the one person, or do you let him machine gun everybody? Well, utilitarians would say what?
Shoot.
Hey, shoot him, because saving one is better than murdering bunches. Now, the objection from Bernard Williams is this would alienate you from your violate your moral integrity. So it would be, so utilitarianism is wrong. Now, a reasonable reply to this would be, well, sometimes morality requires doing tough things. You know, it's kind of the classic, I mean, it often comes up again in fiction, where you have, there's something that is seemingly right to do, but you have to get your hands really dirty to do it. And there's always the, you know, the character who just doesn't want to get their hands dirty because they think it would just be wrong to do that. And then another person who thinks, well, you got to consider the consequences. Now, to give a real example, I was having a discussion about the injection clinics. If you're not familiar with an injection clinic, the idea is basically this. As you know, we get like a real big opioid problem. Actually, we always had drug problems, but now they've got middle class, white people getting problems, so suddenly, oh, let's fix this. But anyways, the injection clinics work like this. One of the big problems with people using needles, as you might imagine, passing them around, is they get covered in disease. So that's bad. Like HIV, hepatitis, and other things. And so what some places have started doing is providing people with clean needles. The idea being that they go in someplace safe, where they can be monitored. If they start overdosing, they can shoot them up with that, there's a nephrine, and they give them clean needles, so that way they're not injecting HIV or hepatitis or whatever. Now, one argument is that you shouldn't do that because it's just wrong to help people use drugs. That's one argument, but the utilitarian argument is, well, if you don't do it, then people are gonna do it anyways, and they're gonna overdose and die. Or they're gonna overdose and have to be taken off to the hospital, and that's gonna cost everybody. Or they get hepatitis or HIV or whatever, they don't have insurance, so you have to pay for it on your insurance. That's why insurance rates in part are high, because if you have insurance, you're paying for everybody who doesn't have insurance. And so you could argue, well, yeah, you're gonna get your hands a little dirty allowing this, but the consequences are good. And someone may say, well, you shouldn't do that because it's just not right to support drugs. And it does have some bite to it, because if someone really is morally opposed to drugs, using them, yeah, that would be getting their hands dirty. They would be allowing something they dislike. But on the other hand, you could argue back that, well, are people's lives worth someone being able to maintain their moral righteousness, being able to say, we're just not gonna do this, we're just gonna let people die, and let people get sick. And that comes, basically, it's a pretty good test of a person's ethical view. My own view is, yeah, do it, because spreading hepatitis C through society is pretty bad. You can be totally selfish about it. The person who's making your salad, you don't want them to have hepatitis all over your salad, because that's how people get hepatitis who don't use drugs. It's not like it just stays. It's like when they wouldn't do anything about HIV. They're like, screw those people. And then of course it spread everywhere. So everyone can get HIV now. If they would have done something back then probably things would be a lot better now. But they're like, screw those people, so let's just let it go. But anyways, of course, again, you take the opposing viewpoint, namely, we should never do things that we think is wrong. Okay, so that's utilitarianism and some problems. Before going to the other big dog of ethics, deontology, anything about this that needs more stuff? Or burritos, which are delicious. Deontology comes from the Greek deon, meaning duty. Not like howdy doody or doggy duty, but duty as an obligation or responsibility. Now, the standard form of deontology is what's called rule deontology. It's the idea that here's how you tell good from bad. What you need is a set of rules. Following those rules is good. Whatever breaks them is bad. Whatever there are no rules for is neutral. Now, the challenge the rule deontologist faces is coming up with the correct set of rules. Because the deontologist doesn't have to be like everyone. You can't go and say, hey, you're a deontologist, the rule is you must buy me a burrito. You're like, buying another burrito. They get to pick their own rules. Now, when getting these rules, the obvious question is, what rules do you use? And that's where rule deontologists, divide up into particular types. One example would be religious deontologists. For example, Moses, you get the 10 Commandments. Now, the big difference between deontology and utilitarianism is this. Utilitarians would say, well, you want to do something. You would ask yourself, if I do this, what are the consequences in terms of happiness and unhappiness? If happiness is greater than unhappiness, okay to do. The deontologist says, does the action break or follow the rules? If it breaks the rules, it's wrong. If it follows the rules, it's right. You don't have to wait around for consequences. So, for example, the 10 Commandments doesn't say thou shalt not commit adultery, unless the other person is really hot and you'd have a really, really good time. It doesn't have consequences, you just don't do that. So it's all thou shalt, not. Now, probably the most famous philosophical deontologist is our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, will be the guy we look at. So why do people like deontology? Well, one thing is, of course, it is rule-based. And even though people say they don't like rules, people generally like rules. They like knowing, like, you know, a clear thing, like this is what you do, this is what you don't do. People may dislike particular rules, but they generally like knowing, okay, what's okay, what's not. In religion is packed full of rules, law is packed full of rules. Another appeal is that it matches our moral intuitions in some cases. Namely, the deontologist, some things are just wrong because they break the rules. It's not a matter of the consequences, they're just some things you don't do. As I mentioned, you can look at many movies and stories as a conflict between deontological morality and utilitarian morality. And a good example is the Avengers Infinity War. Because you have, like Doctor Strange and Iron Man representing kind of utilitarian view. The idea being that you do the greatest good for the greatest number, even if that involves sacrificing, like when Doctor Strange says, I will sacrifice you to protect the time stone, he's being utilitarian. He's saying, you know, what matters is the greater good, and if terrible things, you know, harsh things have to be done, they should be done. And of course, Captain America represents the deontological view, namely, don't sacrifice people. His view is you do the right thing without considering the consequences. But of course, in the movies, doing the right thing regardless of consequences always ends up having the best consequences. I would like to see a movie that really, you know, owns that, and the person sticks to it, and then it's all terrible. You know, I still do the right thing, despite it all being terrible. Although that would be kind of a sad movie, and I do prefer my Marvel comic universe to have happy endings. Now, again, the appeal is that some things we just shouldn't do, even if they have good consequences. For example, take the plane crash story. Suppose, you know, you're a doctor doing an internship on an island, all the doctors leave, plane comes in, crashes, you know, 6 people badly hurt. Now, in the first scenario, you had a choice between spending time saving 5 or 1. And from the principle of triage, we know 5 is more than 1, so save 5. Imagine, let's change the scenario a bit. Plane comes down, crashes, and in order to save these people, you need a lot of blood. You need like organs and stuff. And coincidentally, a person, a hermit, that only you know lives on the island, who has no friends or relatives, and you know they've erased themselves from the grid, comes in and they need their checkup, and coincidentally they're a perfect match. And all you gotta do is give them a little shot, they go nappy nap, and you harvest all their blood and organs, and you save 6 people. So you're trading 1 person for many. Now, utilitarian grounds, that's the right thing to do. 1 dies, so many may live. But morally, we tend to think, what? Do you kill? Yeah, it's wrong to, you know, kill somebody, you know, an innocent person to save 5 people. And so sometimes we're utilitarians, and sometimes we're not. And it seems to often depend on the difference between killing people, actively killing them, and not being able to save them, like in the trolley accident. You know, you throw the lever to avoid killing, you're doing it to avoid killing 5 people, not to try to kill 1. But if you have to kill a person, you know, straight up kill them to save people, then it seems more problematic. Okay, so next time we'll pick up with some more stuff. So have a good rest of the day, however you define goodness, and we'll do more stuff later.